As you know, there is nothing like the power of God. It completely changes people, including the persecutor. God reaches out to those who persecute him, to those who persecute his body, and he turns them 180 degrees after capturing their heart. And we know these stories. I mean, Paul was probably the most famous one. He was out capturing, hunting down, torturing, killing Christians. And he thought this was his duty from God until the Lord intervened and grabbed his heart and completely changed him and then made him one of the greatest evangelists and teachers, etc. Well, the really cool news is that Paul was not the last model. This is still going on today. God is still reaching out to the persecutor and changing their heart. For instance, it reminds me of the story of my friend Dan Bauman. Dan Bauman was arrested, an American. He was arrested in Iran. He is sent into notorious Evin prison. And there's one thing that Evin prison is known for, and here's the clue. It's known as the terror factory. Okay, so you're tortured every day. And Dan is an American, just like you and me, and all of a sudden he's thrust into this environment and he's being tortured every day. And it gets to the point, like you and I would, where he says, I cannot take any more. And he is absolutely on the verge of losing it and crying out to God for escape, crying out to God for rescue. And the Lord reaches down and he whispers into Dan's ear. Do you know what he said? He said, I want you to love and reach the man who's torturing you with my message. Can you imagine? Well, what do you think Dan's response was? I think his response was probably just what mine would be. Dan said, no way, God. I've had those discussions with God. God, you are confused. You don't understand. And God just kept working on his heart. And he opened Dan's eyes to see that this man who was torturing him brutally every day was just a person. And he had a family, and he had hopes, and he had dreams, and yet he had no hope. He was imprisoned in the dark with no one to reach him. But God had assigned Dan. He had assigned Dan to go into the dark and with the light to reach this man. So one day Dan goes for his daily torture session, and he says, stop, before you start. He says, since we're going to be together every day, I think we should become friends. And he reaches out his hand. He says, my name is Dan. What's yours? Well, you can't imagine the response. The man was frozen. His first response was anger and complete sternness. He said, this will never be. And then Dan said, no, we're going to be together every day. We need to be friends. My name is Dan. What is yours? And that began the beginning of a fascinating story where this man's facade crumbled and he became a human being, and he entered into a relationship with Dan, and he asked him for forgiveness, and he began to love on Dan. Amazing story. But this is the story of God's love for those who don't deserve it. Sometimes we are dragged into the darkness, and other times we are assigned there. Either way, it is not a fun place. And so that means a lot of the time we just need to escape, but other times it's an assignment. And in the dark, we need to light a flare. And that flare is to bring in the light of God so that all the lost can see. Think about that. God bless you.